Welcome to Stop My Crisis. I'm your host, Vivian Gaspar, and I'm very fortunate to have with us here today Bobby Kimbrough. He is a retired special agent of 25 years from the U.S. Department of Justice. Bobby, welcome. Thank you so much for making the journey from North Carolina, and I really have a high level of respect and gratitude for your service, and it is really important that we bring out some subjects today that I don't think is covered enough in the aspects that you could share with us. And I really would like to start with something that I don't think enough people realize is a problem in America. Human trafficking. It sounds like something that exists only in third world countries. What have you witnessed with that in America?
First, again, let me say thank you for having me. Thank you for acknowledging my service. I appreciate that. It's a pleasure to be here with you. When we talk about human trafficking, it's a serious issue. Human trafficking really spawns out of an economic issue, supply and demand. What you have what is traffickers who are in countries, Mexico and other countries around the world, that have people that desire to get to the U.S. who may not be able to afford the cost or to smuggle in here. So what you have a trafficker who will say, okay, I can get you from, let's say, Mexico to Atlanta or South Carolina, but there's going to be a cost. So the person may not have the money to pay for the trafficker to get them across the border into that particular country. So what usually happens is, as it relates to human trafficking, I'll bring you across the border, I'll bring you here, but you'll have to work and pay the cost, what it costs me to get you across. And a lot of times the cost is so high, or it's been that you can't afford to pay it back if you tried.
Is this so exorbitant that it's almost like an indentured servitude, or almost like modern day slavery?
Exactly. So I get you across the border. So now I introduce you to, let's say, a friend of mine who may run a particular business, a home care business. They may run house care, lawn, maintenance. And I say, okay, you're going to work for this particular company until you pay the debt off. We'll give you somewhere to stay. And a lot of times when immigration services run up in houses, what they call holding houses, you'll see 20, 30 people living in one house.
Wow, they just in line on the floor in rooms?
Mattresses on several floors. And basically what the reason for that is because you have to have a place to hold them while they're working. So they'll get up in the morning and go work for a particular makeshift company, which is being paid. So let's say I have a particular company X, that does my lawn service, which may have persons that are working for them that are trying to pay that debt back for coming here. So while I'm paying the company, that individual is not being paid anything.
What about food?
Well, they're being fed by the house or the holding places that hold them. You got to feed and clothe them, but the feed or clothing won't be nothing compared to what they're being made or what they're making off of them for their work or their service.
Now, is this ever done inadvertently? I mean, could someone be doing this without knowledge that it's considered human trafficking? Is that possible?
Well, when you say someone being doing it, you mean you could be paying the company, not knowing that the person that's working for you is a servant or paying off a debt. Of course, when if you call a particular company, they come out and work or does work for you, a lawn care company, the people that service my lawn, I have no idea who the gentleman that rides the lawnmower. All I know is I pay a company. Right. Well, the guy that's cutting the grass, who just happens to be Hispanic, I have no idea what his status is. Is he legal or illegal? Is he paying off a debt? All I know is that I pay a company, my lawn is done, and therefore no one ever knows if that may be the case. So you could definitely be paying into a company that has persons or persons that are working here legally or part of human trafficking.
Could this ever be, I mean, you're mentioning a lawn care service as an example of a type of business, but could these victims ever be kidnapped victims and forced into this as a more severe type? Because what you're saying sounds like indentured servitude, where somebody came willingly and now they feel trapped that they can't get out of the cycle to stay in America. Well, have there ever been cases where they're kidnapped to come and do this?
Well, kidnap, I wouldn't say kidnap, but forced, I would say, because, for an example, when we talk about drug cartels, I could hold your family and say, okay, you have family back in a particular city where we're operating out of. If you don't do this for me, if you don't take this across the border, if you don't do that, then we'll bring harm to your family.
Like a drug mule.
Exactly.
And so there's different ways you could have this occur. What other industries could this take place in? You mentioned drug cartels using mules. You mentioned landscaping type of companies. Does this ever happen, like child care?
Anytime you're talking about a service industry where you're going to need a human to provide a service, anything from lawn care to prostitution.
Oh, so there's in prostitution as well?
Of course. You have those all over, prostitution houses all over. You may not see them. They don't have a sign up that says prostitution house.
Brothel here.
Brothel here. It doesn't say that. Brothel IKEA. It doesn't say that. But what I'm saying is that anytime there's a service industry, you're going to find corruption. You're going to find possibility of human trafficking being a part of that.
I mean, even in neighborhoods, we're sitting in New Jersey, but obviously we air throughout the country. But I pass gentlemen's clubs, more frequently known as a go-go bar or something of that nature. I heard once someone told me that the women who work in there could be human traffic victims. Is that also another area?
Without question. That's a human service. People pay for a service that involves human. So anytime you have that aspect of it, and what we have to realize sometimes that we overlook so many times is that money is the driving force behind this. People come here because it is the great country that it is. So when people come here, they want to come here whether it's legal or illegal. And a lot of times people do some uncommon and ungodly things to get here and to stay here.
How, if we ever think we're a witness to this, many of us have lawn care services as an example. How can we help? Is there anything that an average American who may be unaware of this even going on, is there anything that we could do to help that person?
The mayor of New York said something a long time ago during 9/11, which I was a part of. He said, if you see something, say something, right? That same thing holds true. If you see something, say something. Because a lot of times we see things that we turn away from. We don't investigate. We don't look beyond that. I doubt if you would ask the person that cuts your grass or the company that comes out, is the gentleman cutting my grass illegal here?
But do we want to assume all illegal people, or all people that are obviously from foreign countries are here illegal as human trafficked?
No. But what I'm saying is that what I try to make a point is dialogue. Dialogue will tell you a lot of things when you start talking with people. Get to know the person that's servicing your lawn. Get to know the person. I don't say go out to dinner with them, and that's not what I mean. I'm saying engage them in conversation, because a lot of times you engaging people in conversation will tell you a lot of things. That instinct. So if it's not right, then that way you can say something.
This is really good information, because it never occurred to me. A lot of us just go about our day-to-day lives not realizing that this is even an issue. We come here to think that everyone's working of their own free will, being paid fair wages, because that's the world that we live in. So thank you for opening your eyes.
Oh, the pleasure.
This is something that is actually happening in regular middle-class America throughout the whole country. So let's be aware and have more dialogue and help the fellow human being that may be here in not the best conditions that they should be. Welcome back to Stop My Crisis. We're here again with Bobby Kimbrough, a retired U.S. Special Agent with the U.S. Department of Justice. And we're very grateful to Bobby to share insight with his experience as a special agent in the world of drugs. And especially here today to talk about how drugs in rural America, you heard me right, not urban America, suburbia, rural America, and how this epidemic is tremendously rising out of nowhere, and how it is not in the forefront of what we talk about. We're still looking at drugs being primarily in the urban areas. Bobby, tell us how that's different now, please.
Well, what makes it so different, thank you again for being here. What makes it so different is that now we're living in a time where before drugs were not as readily available as they are now. You have a flood of drugs coming across, tons and tons coming across the borders every day into America. We have become, years ago we had this thing what we call the war on drugs, the war on drugs. So the war on drugs was supposed to stop the drug traffic. It was supposed to put a dent into it. But what has happened is that the supply and demand has increased so much. Not only that, but the economic value. You know, you take current market now, a kilo of heroin, $70,000, what a kilo will cost you. Well, if you take that and you, what we call break it up, chop it up, whip it up, so that turns into three. So $70,000 has now become $210,000 on the street value. So there's an economic demand for it. And anytime money and economic advancement is involved, a lot of times you have corruption. So as it relates to the suburbs, how drugs have taken off. For years, drugs in the suburbs was almost like a taboo other than pills or prescription or things of that nature.
Like opioids, and the whole stereotype of a housewife, that old song, the housewife taking opioids, and that's far from the situation right now.
So true. So now what has happened is this new thing of marijuana, hydro marijuana.
What is hydro marijuana?
Hydro, just another marijuana on steroids. So what happens is what we don't realize is that marijuana a lot of times is the gateway into something else. Well, you know what? Maybe I'll try this time. Maybe I'll lace the marijuana with a little cocaine. And before you realize it, you have a cocaine addiction. I want to try with something totally different. So we have gotten into a society now where the typical drug users, there's no such thing as a typical drug user anymore, because drug has touched all facets of our societies, all economic places in our society.
Well, what I've actually heard recently, that places such, you'd already envision rolling beautiful hills and forests and spas like Vermont, New Hampshire, places where there's sometimes more cows than people. And now I hear that there's meth labs and heroin issues and cocaine issues. Is that the case now? It
is. You know, I want to share something with you. Several months ago, I was going to an engagement to speak, and I wanted to do something different. So I went by an addiction clinic, and I saw this beautiful young lady who didn't look like me. And I asked her, how could I find someone that would be willing to go and speak and share their story? She looked at me and she said, I would love to do that. I took this woman with me to a high school. They thought she was a soccer mom. They had no idea that her husband was a CEO of a company. They had no idea, but she told her story, and she said that she became curious, and her curiosity led her from prescription medication to actually becoming a user of heroin.
Heroin?
Exactly.
So was she a middle-aged white lady? I mean, what was she?
This was a middle-aged, upper-class white female. And you know what? To this day, her name is Bobby. I'll give you her first name. To this day, me and Bobby still text back and forth because she tells me that telling her story has empowered her, and me and her text back and forth to give her strength. And her story is that you can't paint the place of drugs being an urban thing now. It's a problem in America now. It's an American problem.
And so you're saying this lady, an upper class person, fell victim to where she needed to go into a rehab facility for heroin. That's not a light drug.
It's not.
That's a very severe drug. I mean, did she have children?
She did. She had a daughter. As a matter of fact, it didn't start out as heroin. See, that's the thing that a lot of us make the mistake of. The guy that started as a heroin addict didn't wake up that day and say, hey, I'm a heroin addict. It started a long time before that. It was a progression.
So I can't even imagine the concept of, you know, you're raising children on one hand, and on the other hand, you're finding a place to put a needle. So can you give us more examples of where has the task force changed to where they look for their meth labs or the users of these heavier drugs in rural America?
Well, see, one thing you have to realize that when you go to rural America, the concept of looking for drugs for so long was in urban America.
They don't have to drive anymore.
Exactly. So now what you find is a lot of drug pushers or drug sellers, they go to the suburbs because they realize that ain't where law enforcement is looking at. until recently. So when you go to rural America, who's coming out there to see if I have a meth lab, unless we're checking the utilities and the things that we do in law enforcement to check and see what's really going on out there. But who's coming out there? Because you're so isolated that the isolation becomes a cover for you to operate.
So does, that TV show Breaking Bad that they no longer have air, did that actually do a service? Because it showed very middle-class people in the middle of the country doing meth. And I think the gentleman on the TV show was a high school teacher.
Meth is on the rise because before meth was known as a cheap drug, a biker drug, a cheap high. But because it was so cheap, and you can actually make it from methamphetamine, meth is something you can go to a pharmacy with the right ingredients and this and that, and though you have meth. Meth lab, that's something that you can actually create.
Yourself, you don't have to go
exactly.
to the stereotypical drug pusher.
Exactly.
So have you seen the police evolving, and any law enforcement evolving how they do their modus operandi to deal with the drug war, if you will, where they change from going to urban to more suburban and rural areas?
You have to. When I started in law enforcement some 30 years ago, we were going to drug labs with no mask on or things that. So we've had to change, or the law enforcement has to evolve because the drug not only become more potent, more stronger, they're dangerous now. So when you go into these meth labs, you have to go in, you have to wear protective clothing, protective breathing apparatus just to go in there. So it's changed the dynamics of how we fight the drug war. And drugs in America have become so prevalent now than they were before.
Did they also open up as to who they suspect could be the user or the pusher or the drug dealer? They open up their, who they are looking for? Oh,
without question. Because, you're typically looking at a guy on the corner selling rocks or small bundles of heroin. But now what you have is you have people selling kilos. Back in my time, who could afford to buy a kilo? A kilo of heroin now, marketplace now, $70,000. A kilo of cocaine, $30,000. That's a lot of money.
Right.
Yeah. So definitely it has changed the whole demographics of drugs in America.
So now it's everywhere. There is no escaping it. There's no more stereotype. The police are recognizing that stereotype has been smashed. They don't just look in one area; they're looking in all areas.
Anywhere in America, you probably could go 5 or 6 blocks in either direction and probably find what you're looking for. Or if not, the thing of 4 degrees separation. Somebody knows somebody who can give you what you want.
So this is going from not someone who's uneducated,
exactly,
but it goes to everyone, every socio-economical class at this point.
Yeah, all of us know someone or know someone who is either tried, whether it be marijuana, something as simple as marijuana, or something as hard as cocaine or heroin.
Well, we found a marijuana in its purest form. We were talking about the whole medical cannabis movement. So we'd like to separate that out because that's still being really looked at in the legal realm. So let's talk at the drugs that no one's disputing. I mean, the meth, the heroin, the cocaine, no one's disputing that those are ruining lives and families.
Every day.
So this has been really enlightening. Thank you so much. I'd like to now transfer over to something that is another serious topic, drug violence. How have you seen in your career drug violence affecting an average American?
Well, drug violence, with drugs and the corruption and the money and the drugs comes the violence. It becomes a thing of territory. I got to have drugs to protect the territory which I sell them on. I got to have guns to protect the money that I'm making because I've got to always worry about somebody robbing me. Got to worry about somebody always trying to steal the product or rob me. So that leads over into a whole nother animal, a whole nother conversation. We talk about drugs and guns, violence and drugs. Across America, there are several units, what they call VD units, violence and drugs, which are attached to the drugs, the drug trade.
So are these always going to be illegally obtained guns? I mean, if you're having people going to gun dealerships or they have these gun shows, I mean, they have a lot of them, I think, all over the place, much less in Las Vegas. Are there enough background investigations to make a dent in this? I mean, do you think the gun laws need to be more stringent to help the situation?
When you talk about gun laws in America or guns, period, we all have our own perception, our own perspective of what we think guns or who should have them. But what I will tell you is that in America, per capita, or any other nation of our same capital or economic status, we have more guns than any other country. What I'm saying is that, and I know, we love our guns, but at the same time, we have a lot of guns on the street. Therefore, we have a lot of more, the percentage of gun violence is higher in America.
When you say on the street, what does that term mean?
On the streets mean young kids carrying guns. That means people carrying guns who, in my opinion, have no business carrying them. Licensed, convicted felons, people who have ill will, ill intent, who are not emotionally stable to
right,
carry
I was going to say,
gun.
what about emotionally
Exactly.
unstable individuals, mentally unstable individuals?
Without question, carrying a gun carries a lot of responsibility. I've carried a gun for 30 years of my life. A gun is just not a novelty or a novel. I have a gun. It's not for that purpose. A gun serves only one purpose. That's killing. It serves only one purpose.
Now, there are proponents of, the Second Amendment, the gun to have a gun, of those who live in concealed carry states or open carry states versus those that are states that make it much, much more difficult and forbid it basically unless you're in a very, very minor category. Have you seen that those states that allow open and concealed carry that lower the perhaps the incidences of violence because they're there to protect themselves? There's that theory.
Yeah, that's that theory.
So it's an even playing field is what they were trying to say.
Exactly. In my opinion, I have no problem with people owning weapons. I own one myself. I have no issue with that. But what I think that we need to do our due diligence before we allow persons to possess a weapon that takes a life.
Of course, because naturally it's not about the weapon, it's who yields it.
Exactly.
Who wields it, rather.
Exactly.
It's who wields the weapon.
Exactly.
That is the issue.
Exactly.
So
Without
it's
question.
more of restraining who is classified that they should be allowed to have a weapon. And of course, I believe, honestly, that if someone's going to own a gun, they should have training in how to handle it appropriately because, unfortunately, there's a lot of preventable violence and a lot of tragedies that stem from mishandling a weapon. Unfortunately, also, when it comes to children, there's too many stories. There shouldn't be no stories at all. There should be a complete lack of stories of children who accidentally hurt someone, including themselves, because they're improperly stored and because there's lack of training. So that's one thing I was going to ask you about is how have you witnessed in your career guns being misused, perhaps unfortunately tragically, by children?
Oh, I mean, that's commonplace, accidental discharges. I mean, even at my time going through Quantico, as an agent, we had an accidental discharge. An instructor had an accidental discharge. A weapon has no respecter of the handler. It's going to perform as it's designed to do. When the trigger's pulled and the hammer falls and hit the pin, there's a projectile coming out of the barrel. So what I'm saying is that if you own a gun, I think you should go to some type of training, gun safety training, some type of learning how to operate that weapon, and also storing that weapon.
Yes.
Because, see, you can store a gun. How do you store it? Do you store it, as we say, hot, loaded, with one in the chamber? How do you store your weapon? Do you have it locked? I mean, do you have little kids in your house? We hide things and forget where we've hidden them sometime and realize that, wow, a child has later found where the gun was hidden at.
I also think someone should tell someone else. So let's say you're a single parent.
Exactly.
And you've hidden a gun. God forbid something happens to you, a car accident or something happens, and no one else knows where that weapon is. That's a big problem. I think you should disclose to someone who's trusted you could find your weapon in case something happens to you.
That's an excellent point. Excellent point. You should
so
always.
Your children don't find it if something happens to you.
Right.
And that's another way to keep the children safe.
Yeah. And me personally, I think that you should have conversation with your kids, if you're a gun owner, what that weapon does, what that weapon is there for. My kids have grown up in a household from my oldest to my youngest with the weapon. They'll see my weapon sitting somewhere, and they pay it no mind because it's not something new, it's not a novel. So I think that if you're going to carry a weapon, then we need to educate our family.
Excellent. Thank you very much. That is a really good information that everyone needs to heed. If you're a gun owner, make sure you obtain it legally, practice using it, cleaning it, and of course, store it as far away from children as possible. Store your gun and keep it locked and safe.